Willow Creek, Oregon, 2019. Willow Creek was the kind of town where secrets had a way of floating to the surface, like driftwood on the lake, eventually carried to shore for everyone to see. It sat tucked between evergreen hills and the still, slate-blue water of Lake Norwood, a place where mornings smelled faintly of pine and evenings glowed with the orange reflection of sunset on the ripples. If you drove through its single main street, you'd see the same lineup of businesses that had been there for decades: Murphy's General Store with its creaky wooden floorboards, the Willow Diner where the coffee was always hot but never quite good, and Harper's Bait and Tackle, which doubled as the unofficial meeting point for men who pretended they were just talking fishing, but were really swapping stories about everyone else in town. And in a place this small, everyone was a story. Emily Carter and Daniel Reeves had always been the favorite chapter. Emily was the kind of woman people described as gentle, not because she was shy, but because everything she did seemed deliberate, measured. She taught 3rd grade at Willow Creek Elementary, and had this way of making even the most restless child sit still when she read aloud. In the afternoons, she liked to walk along the lake trail, stopping at a particular bench under a leaning cedar tree to jot down bits of poetry in her weathered leather notebook. Daniel, on the other hand, was all easy charm and strong hands. He worked as a carpenter, crafting everything from hand-carved furniture to fixing broken porches. There wasn't a soul in Willow Creek who hadn't called him for help at some point, and he never turned them down. Broad-shouldered, tanned from years of working outdoors, and with a smile that could make even old Mrs. Peterson from the library blush, Daniel was the kind of man people liked instantly. They'd been together since high school, prom dates turned soulmates, or so the town believed. In a place where breakups were common and divorces were whispered about for years, Emily and Daniel were proof that love could last. At least, that's what everyone thought. The first whispers began like they always do in small towns, casually, almost carelessly. One Saturday morning in June 2019, Margaret Willis, who ran the tiny florist shop on Main, mentioned to her sister over coffee that she'd seen Emily sitting in the corner booth of the Willow Diner, with a man she didn't recognize. Not Daniel. The stranger was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt that looked far too polished for Willow Creek's usual crowd. The two of them sat close, their heads tilted in as they talked. Margaret had been busy filling an order for wedding centerpieces, but she'd caught enough to notice something off. Emily wasn't her usual smiling self. She looked tense. By Monday, the story had spread from the florist to the diner to the bait shop, mutating slightly each time it was told. Some said the man was a relative from out of town. Others were convinced he was more than that. When Daniel was asked about it, casually, of course, maybe at the counter of the hardware store, he'd laugh it off. Just a friend of hers, he'd say, with that calm, steady smile. It was the same smile he'd had since high school, the one that reassured people instantly. But smiles can hide a lot. Inside, Daniel felt a slow, sour unease curling in his chest. He told himself not to overthink it. Emily wasn't the kind of woman to betray him. They'd built too much together, shared too many years. But still, the image of her sitting with that stranger stuck in his mind, replaying at odd moments. While sanding down a table leg. While lying in bed at night. While driving past the diner. It didn't help that Emily never mentioned it. Life in Willow Creek rolled on as usual, but for Daniel, something had shifted. He started noticing little things he'd never paid attention to before. Emily's phone, face down on the kitchen counter when he walked in. The way she'd pause before answering a text. The fact that she seemed distracted lately, her thoughts somewhere far away. And then, one evening in late June, he found something that deepened his unease. Emily had left her leather notebook on the porch swing, open to a page that wasn't poetry at all. Instead, it was a list. Names. Times. Places. Most were ordinary: grocery, 4 p.m., school supply order. But one stood out. Willow Diner, 2:30 p.m. Daniel stared at the single initial. He thought of the stranger in the crisp shirt. He thought of the gossip. And something in him tightened. Michael Lawson. The name spread through Willow Creek slowly, the way a chill creeps into a house when someone leaves the window open. People didn't know much about him at first, only that he was from Portland, that he had a camera slung over his shoulder more often than not, and that he drove a beat-up silver Ford pickup with Oregon plates and a dent in the driver's side door. The truth, Emily explained to anyone curious enough to ask, was simple. Michael was a freelance photographer working on a travel book. Willow Creek, with its glassy lake and misty hills, had caught his attention. He'd come chasing landscapes, but stayed because the town seemed to offer something more. Emily met him on a breezy Saturday morning in early June, at the farmer's market that ran along the edge of Main Street. She'd been standing in front of a stall stacked with golden honey jars and punnets of raspberries when he spoke. "Do you know if the lake really looks like the postcards?" She turned, surprised. He was taller than she expected, with dark hair that curled at the ends and a 3-day stubble that gave him an unpolished charm. His camera hung from a thick strap across his chest, his fingers absently turning the focus ring as they talked. "It depends," she told him. "If you're here at noon, it's just blue water. But at sunset, it's like glass holding fire." That was all it took. Michael asked if she could point him to the best spots for shooting. She mentioned the cedar bench on the lake trail, the one she liked to visit when she was writing. They parted with a smile, and she thought nothing more of it, at least not then. In the weeks that followed, Michael's presence in Emily's life went from occasional to routine. He had a way of making even mundane conversations feel like shared secrets. Emily told Daniel about him at first, about his work, his stories from traveling the coast, the strange people he'd met along the way. "He's helping me get back into my writing," she explained one evening over dinner. "It's like, his photos make me want to put words to them." Daniel nodded, chewing slowly. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with it. But he couldn't help noticing how animated she became when she talked about Michael, the way her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in a long time. By late June, subtle changes began creeping into their home life. Emily stayed late after school more often, claiming she needed to finish grading or prep for the next day. Her phone, once left casually on the coffee table, now stayed close to her hand, face down. Sometimes it buzzed with a message she wouldn't open until Daniel wasn't looking. He told himself not to be paranoid. He trusted her. Or at least, he used to. Then came the rainy evening. The kind of rain Willow Creek was known for, steady, cold, soaking everything in a gray haze. Daniel was driving home from the hardware store when he took a side road to avoid a fallen tree. It curved past the old lumberyard, then the empty stretch near the edge of town where only a few street lamps burned weakly against the mist. That's when he saw it. Michael's silver truck, parked facing the trees. Wipers ticking back and forth. Inside, Emily sat in the passenger seat. Her head rested against Michael's shoulder. They weren't kissing, weren't even speaking, just sitting there, looking ahead at nothing. But Daniel felt it in his chest, a sharp, sudden break in something he thought was solid. It was in that quiet, unremarkable moment that his certainty about Emily began to collapse. September 14th, the Harvest Fair. Every fall, Willow Creek transformed for one weekend. The streets were strung with gold and crimson banners, the air smelled of cinnamon, wood smoke, and hot cider. Families wandered between stalls selling handmade quilts, jars of preserves, and fresh pies. It was a tradition older than most of the people in town, and for many, it marked the last big gathering before winter settled in. Daniel and Emily arrived together, just like they always had. From a distance, they looked like any other couple, walking side by side, smiling politely at neighbors, stopping to greet old friends. But to anyone paying close attention, the cracks were there. Daniel's jaw was set in that locked, grinding way that comes from holding back words. His eyes moved constantly, not on the stalls or the games, but over the crowd, scanning, searching. And when he found what he was looking for, his expression tightened further. Michael. He stood near the cider stand, camera in hand, snapping candid shots of children on hay bales and couples holding caramel apples. But when Emily drifted toward him, Daniel caught the change in Michael's smile, subtle, but there. The two of them laughed together, heads tilted in toward one another, as if the rest of the fair faded away. Daniel didn't walk over. He didn't cause a scene. Instead, he stood there, his hands curling into loose fists in his jacket pockets, the noise of the fair muffled by the blood rushing in his ears. That night, when Emily finally came home, she found Daniel sitting in the living room, not watching TV, not reading, just sitting. The conversation started quietly enough. A question about how much time she'd been spending with Michael. A half-hearted reassurance from Emily that it was nothing. But the calm frayed quickly. "You've been lying to me," Daniel said, his voice low but hard. "No," Emily shot back, "you've been looking for lies that aren't there. You're trying to control who I talk to, where I go. It's not control when it's my wife." The word wife hit the air like a hammer. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the shouting began in earnest, sharp, fast, and raw. Years of unspoken frustrations rushed in, turning the conversation into something far larger than Michael. And then, as quickly as it had started, Daniel grabbed his truck keys. "I need to get out of here." The door slammed behind him. He didn't have a destination in mind. He drove without thinking, letting the winding roads pull him through the outskirts of town, past silent barns and dark fields, into the tree-lined backroads near the lake. The headlights carved tunnels of light through the fog drifting low over the water. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the air was still damp, heavy. That's when he saw it. A familiar silver truck, parked by the water's edge. No other cars around. The interior light glowed faintly, just enough for Daniel to make out the outline of someone in the driver's seat. Michael. Daniel slowed, pulling onto the shoulder, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He didn't know exactly why he'd stopped, only that whatever was about to happen would change everything. From this point forward, the night is reconstructed not from Daniel's account, because Daniel never gave one, but from fragments, the pings of cell towers, a grainy security camera mounted outside the Lake Norwood boathouse, and the testimony of a lone fisherman anchored on the far side of the cove. What we know is this. 10:42 p.m. Michael's silver truck sits idling near the shoreline, its headlights washing over the damp gravel. He's leaning back in the driver's seat, phone in hand, when another pair of headlights sweeps in from the road. Daniel's truck pulls in fast, braking hard enough to spit gravel against the wheel wells. The fisherman says he heard the slam of a door, then footsteps. Daniel moves toward the silver truck, shoulders tense, arms swinging slightly as if he's trying to burn off energy. He stops at the driver's side and pounds on the window, 3 hard knocks. Michael startles, then opens the door. He steps out slowly, one hand raised, palm open, like he's facing a skittish animal. "Daniel. You need to calm down." 10:43 p.m., the security camera catches shapes moving in the dark. No clear faces, no words, but the fisherman hears them. Shouting. Daniel's voice is sharp, cracking through the night air, "You've been destroying my marriage." Michael's response is lower, measured, the tone of someone trying to keep control. "Emily deserves better." Those 3 words slice through the fog. Better than you. Later, prosecutors would call this moment an explosive emotional break. Experts would talk about adrenaline, fight-or-flight responses, tunnel vision. But in reality, it happened faster than anyone could explain. Daniel takes a step back, not retreating, but toward his own truck. He reaches into the bed and pulls out a tire iron. Michael sees it. His own hands go up higher. His voice gets sharper, "Daniel." The struggle is quick. A flurry of motion, a flash of metal catching the light. The fisherman hears a choked sound, not quite a shout, not quite a cry. Then nothing but the slap of water against the shore. 10:44 p.m. Michael crumples to the gravel, his breath gone, blood running dark in the dim light. Daniel just stands there, chest heaving, the tire iron hanging loose in his grip. He can hear the faint rush of the lake, the distant call of a night bird, his own pulse thundering in his ears. And then, as if guided by something automatic, detached, he moves. He drops the tire iron in the bed of his truck. He bends down, gripping Michael under the arms, his fingers slipping against wet fabric. The fisherman hears the scrape of boots on gravel, the drag of weight. Daniel hauls him to the water's edge. The surface is calm, black, reflecting the faint shimmer of the moon. Without a word, he lets go. Michael's body slides into the lake, the water swallowing it with barely a ripple. 3 days later. The lake gave him back. It was early morning when the call came in. A local fisherman had found something tangled in his net, something heavy that didn't belong to the water. The sheriff's deputies arrived to find Michael Lawson's body drifting just beneath the surface, caught in a mess of nylon line and lakeweed. The air was still, but there was a quiet hum of voices as they worked. A deputy waded waist-deep into the water, guiding the body to shore while another draped a tarp over the scene. The autopsy confirmed what everyone suspected: blunt force trauma to the head. No defensive wounds. No signs of a prolonged fight. It was over in seconds. The investigation. The detectives didn't have to look far. Daniel Reeves' name came up before the sun had set that same day. He had no alibi for the night Michael died. His truck had been seen by the lake on the security footage. Fingerprints matching Daniel's were lifted from the driver's side door of Michael's truck. And when questioned, Daniel's version of events kept shifting, small details changing each time he told the story, as if he couldn't keep the lie straight in his head. When the evidence was finally laid out in front of him, the fight drained from his body. "I didn't mean to kill him," he told the detectives, his voice breaking. I couldn't stand losing her." The trial. By the time the case reached court, Willow Creek had split into factions. Some believed Daniel's act was a tragic mistake, the kind anyone might make in a moment of emotional collapse. Others saw it as the inevitable result of a possessive man unwilling to let go. Emily sat in the witness stand, pale, hands trembling, eyes fixed somewhere far away. "Yes," she said under oath, "I cared for Michael. But we were never romantically involved. He was a friend. Someone who encouraged me to write again, to believe in myself. That was all." Her words hung in the courtroom like a cold draft. Daniel didn't look at her as she spoke. The sentence. The jury took less than a day. Guilty. 28 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary for second-degree murder. No chance of parole until 2047. Daniel was led from the courtroom in shackles, his head bowed, his face unreadable. Emily stayed in her seat for a long moment after he was gone, as if leaving would make the finality of it too real. The aftermath. Months later, Emily agreed to one final interview with the local news, sitting at her kitchen table, the lake visible in the background through a rain-speckled window. "People think crimes of passion are about love," she said softly. "But they're really about control. And when control slips away, love can turn into something unrecognizable and deadly." The camera lingered on her face for a moment longer. Then the frame shifted to the lake, calm, still, its surface giving nothing away. But in Willow Creek, people had learned a hard truth that year: still waters can hide the darkest depths.